Hello and welcome to the Unseen Question. The question of whether religion is a mental illness is one that stirs up strong emotions. For some, even asking it feels offensive. For others, the idea seems obvious. If someone believes they are speaking directly to invisible beings, obeying their commands and adjusting their life around unseen forces, it certainly looks on the surface like symptoms of a psychological disorder. But is that really the right way to look at it? Let's approach this carefully. Not from hostility, not from cheap shots, but from psychology, sociology, and logic. Because only then can we answer honestly, is religion something like a collective mental illness, or is it something else entirely? First, let's think about what mental illness actually means. In psychiatry, mental illness describes conditions that cause distress, impair daily functioning, or distort someone's perception of reality in harmful ways. Schizophrenia, for instance, involves hearing voices that aren't there. Major depression can leave people unable to work, maintain relationships, or even get out of bed. These illnesses are diagnosed because they cause measurable suffering or dysfunction. Now compare that to religion. Billions of people pray, attend rituals, and sincerely believe they are communicating with divine beings. By clinical standards, hearing voices or seeing visions would usually be considered hallucinatory. Yet in a religious context, those same experiences are not just tolerated but celebrated. If someone claims they had a vision of the Virgin Mary, they may be honored as a mystic. If they say an angel gave them instructions, they might become a prophet. But if they describe a glowing man in their kitchen telling them secret knowledge, doctors may diagnose them with psychosis. The difference is not in the experience itself, it's in whether society approves of it. Psychologists often point out this double standard. When unusual beliefs are shared by many, we call them faith. When they are held by one person alone, we call them delusion. The psychiatrist Thomas Szasz once put it bluntly, "If you talk to God, you are praying. If God talks to you, you are schizophrenic." That line captures the strange overlap between faith and pathology. But should we then conclude religion is a mass delusion, a socially acceptable form of psychosis? It's tempting to say yes. After all, the behaviors look similar. But this is where the picture gets complicated. Religion, unlike an individual mental illness, does not always impair functioning. In many cases, it does the opposite. It provides structure, purpose, identity, and community. It can motivate people to work harder, endure suffering, or sacrifice for a cause. From an evolutionary perspective, religion seems to have offered group survival advantages. Tribes bound by a shared faith were more cohesive, more willing to cooperate, and more resilient under stress. That doesn't make the beliefs true, but it does mean they served a function. Think about this. If a man on the street shouted that a cosmic being demands blood sacrifices, we'd see him as unstable. But if an ancient community followed that same practice together, they'd see it as sacred law. The psychology behind both is the same, belief in unseen authority, but one is classified as illness and the other as culture. That tells us religion may not be a mental illness in the strict medical sense. Instead, it may be a cultural technology that hijacks many of the same mental processes that, when isolated, look pathological. Consider the phenomenon of ritual. Religious rituals mirror the repetitive, compulsive patterns found in obsessive-compulsive disorder. Washing hands in a precise way, repeating prayers word for word, avoiding certain foods or behaviors under penalty of guilt. In OCD, these compulsions are seen as harmful. In religion, they are seen as holy. Again, the difference is social framing. Or look at guilt. Religious guilt can mimic the crushing self-blame found in depression, the sense of being sinful, unworthy, in need of constant forgiveness. In therapy, a patient who blames themselves for everything might be guided to see their thinking errors. In church, that same mindset is reinforced as spiritual humility. What psychology would treat as a cognitive distortion, religion praises as virtue. So maybe the sharper question is not, is religion a mental illness, but does religion exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities that mental illness exposes? And here, the evidence is strong. Cognitive science has shown humans are wired for what's called hyperactive agency detection. That means we naturally assume events have intentional agents behind them. If we hear a rustle in the grass, we assume something alive caused it, even if it's just the wind. This bias helped our ancestors survive predators, but it also made them prone to imagining spirits, gods, and demons. Religion is built on this quirk. It amplifies a mental shortcut into a worldview. Similarly, humans have what psychologists call a theory of mind. We project thoughts, feelings, and intentions onto others, and sometimes onto non-human things. That's why children talk to stuffed animals, or why adults name their cars. Religion extends this tendency to the universe itself, attributing will, judgment, and personality to the cosmos. Again, not insanity, just an ordinary mental process blown up into theology. But where does harm come in? After all, psychiatry is concerned with suffering, and religion, while comforting for some, also causes enormous harm. People refuse medical treatment because they believe prayer will heal them. Parents traumatize children with threats of eternal punishment. Wars, oppression, and violence are justified as divine commands. In these cases, religious belief clearly creates dysfunction on a massive scale. Think of Jonestown. In 1978, over 900 people died in a mass suicide murder led by Jim Jones. These were not random psychotic individuals. They were ordinary people caught in a religious system that normalized delusional obedience. Or think of Heaven's Gate in the 1990s, where followers believed they would ascend to a spaceship. The line between religious faith and diagnosable delusion collapses in these extremes. But it's not only in cults. Mainstream religions also show traits we'd otherwise call pathological. The suppression of sexuality, for example, can resemble repressive neurosis. The belief in sin and punishment after death can resemble paranoia. The ecstasy of worship can resemble mania. None of this proves that religion is literally a disease of the brain, but it shows how it mirrors mental illness in its mechanisms and outcomes. At the same time, we can't ignore the social immunity religion enjoys. The same behavior that would send someone to therapy if done alone becomes untouchable when done in groups. If one person kneels to invisible beings and chants words into the air, we call it delusion. If 1,000 do it together, we call it tradition. This is why calling religion a mental illness is provocative. It cuts through the protective shield of culture and labels the sacred as sick. Still, we need precision. Religion is not identical to schizophrenia, depression, or OCD. It doesn't emerge from brain malfunction in the same way. It emerges from normal cognitive patterns, amplified and institutionalized. In that sense, it's less like a personal illness and more like a socially constructed delusion, something that thrives not because of individual dysfunction, but because of collective reinforcement. Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dynamic. He described religion as a herd instinct that turned weakness into moral superiority. Not madness, but a survival strategy disguised as truth. Sigmund Freud, on the other hand, famously called religion an illusion, comparing it to a collective childhood neurosis. Both perspectives capture the same point. Religion behaves like a mental illness, even if it isn't one medically. So what's the verdict? Religion is not technically a mental illness, but it exploits the same mental vulnerabilities, produces similar symptoms, and causes harms comparable to disorders. The difference is that instead of being treated, it is celebrated. Instead of being challenged, it is enforced. And while individuals with delusions are encouraged to seek help, entire societies built on religion see no reason to question the sanity of their beliefs. In the end, the healthier approach is not to diagnose religion in medical terms, but to recognize it as a socially sustained illusion that operates through the same psychological machinery as mental disorders. That recognition matters, because only when we see how deeply it exploits human cognition can we begin to move past it. The question, is religion a mental illness? Is less about diagnosis and more about understanding. And once we understand, the next step is obvious: to build meaning, morality, and connection in ways that don't depend on illusions. Ways that free the mind instead of binding it. Ways that honor reality rather than deny it. But let's press further. If religion isn't technically a mental illness, why does the comparison resonate so strongly? Part of the reason is that both religion and mental illness deal with distorted perceptions of reality. A person in psychosis sees patterns where none exist, hears voices no one else hears, and interprets random events as meaningful messages. A religious believer does something remarkably similar, attributing earthquakes to divine wrath, seeing coincidences as answered prayers, or hearing the still small voice of God in their thoughts. One crucial difference is that religious people often share these interpretations with millions of others. The weight of numbers makes the belief feel credible. Psychologists call this social proof. If everyone around you believes something, you're far less likely to question it. In fact, your brain may punish you for doubting because rejection by the group once meant death on the savannah. So religion taps into this primal survival instinct, holding people in belief systems that, if isolated, would look indistinguishable from delusion. And that raises another angle. Religion is not just tolerated, it is protected. Protected by laws, by traditions, and by emotional taboos. If someone critiques your favorite sports team, you may argue with them. But if someone critiques your deepest religious convictions, you may feel personally attacked. Why? Because religion intertwines itself with identity. In psychology, this is called fusion, where belief and self are welded together. To question one feels like questioning the other. That's why even gentle criticism of religion can trigger such defensive reactions. It feels like an attack on the person's sanity, when in reality it's just an attack on the belief. This defense mechanism explains why religions have lasted so long. Unlike an isolated delusion, which collapses under evidence or treatment, religious delusions are shielded by culture. No matter how many contradictions are exposed, no matter how much suffering is caused, the faith is maintained by community reinforcement. Believers reassure one another constantly. It's true, we all know it's true, and to doubt is dangerous. In clinical terms, this looks like group confirmation of a shared false belief. What psychiatry would call folie à plusieurs, or madness of many. And there's something else. Religion doesn't just mimic illness. It often worsens actual mental illness. Studies have shown that strict religious upbringings increase the risk of anxiety, depression, and shame around natural human impulses. Children raised to fear eternal damnation often carry those fears into adulthood, where they manifest as nightmares, compulsive behaviors, and guilt-driven self-loathing. The very thought patterns religion instills, sin, punishment, surveillance, unworthiness, mirror cognitive distortions therapists work hard to undo. Consider the idea of being watched at all times. In cognitive psychology, this resembles paranoid ideation, yet in religion, it is normalized. God is watching you, believers are told from childhood. Every thought, every action monitored by an all-seeing eye. For some, this creates comfort. For others, it's an invisible prison that never lets the mind rest. If the same mindset were applied to an ordinary human authority, say the government, we would call it Orwellian surveillance, but under the name of God, it becomes holy. And here's where the irony deepens. People often assume religion heals. But in reality, religion frequently creates the wounds it claims to cure. It instills guilt, then offers forgiveness. It creates fear of hell, then offers salvation. It breaks down natural human joy in sexuality, then offers absolution through confession. This cycle is psychologically similar to an abusive relationship, where harm and comfort come from the same source. The victim learns to cling to the very system that traumatizes them. Of course, many believers will say religion has helped them cope with life's struggles. And it's true. Religion can reduce stress, build community, and provide hope. But so can secular systems. Therapy, art, philosophy, science, friendships, and even hobbies can bring the same benefits without requiring belief in invisible beings. The difference is that religion makes those benefits conditional on faith, obedience, and submission to authority. So what happens if we strip away the supernatural? What remains is community, ritual, storytelling, and meaning-making. These are human needs, not divine gifts, and they can be met in healthier ways. Secular communities are now forming around exactly these elements: shared purpose, rituals of gratitude, collective projects, without requiring members to suspend rational thought. That's proof that the good religion offers is not unique to it, but the harms often are. If religion isn't a mental illness but functions like one, the key question becomes, how do societies outgrow it? Not by mocking or attacking believers, which only deepens their defensiveness, but by offering alternative structures that meet the same needs without the delusion. A person trapped in paranoia doesn't heal when you laugh at them. They heal when you help them see reality in a safe and supportive way. Perhaps the same principle applies to religion. Philosopher Daniel Dennett once said, "Religions are socially constructed parasitic memes that thrive by replicating themselves in minds, regardless of the well-being of their hosts." This metaphor, while blunt, captures the essence. Religion is not a personal illness, but a cultural virus. It spreads not because it is true, but because it exploits vulnerabilities in human psychology. The cure, then, is not medicine but awareness, a shift in consciousness that recognizes belief for what it is, a story mistaken for reality. And here's the real test. Can humanity create meaning without delusion? Can we find wonder, gratitude, and moral depth without invisible overseers? The evidence says yes. Science reveals a universe more vast and mysterious than any scripture imagined. Ethics grounded in empathy and reason provide stronger, fairer, moral systems than ancient laws ever did. And personal meaning, drawn from creativity, love, and discovery, proves far more authentic than borrowed dogma. So perhaps the final answer is this. Religion is not technically a mental illness, but it is a psychological cage built on the same frailties that give rise to illness. It is a socially reinforced illusion, passed down for survival, sustained by fear, and defended as identity. Calling it a sickness may not be medically accurate, but it is spiritually accurate in one sense. It sickens human potential by keeping minds in chains. And when those chains are broken, when people step into reality without fear of invisible punishment or false hope of eternal reward, they discover that life itself, fragile, finite, unrepeatable, is enough. More than enough. It is not an illusion to be escaped, but a reality to be embraced. If we step back and look at the bigger picture, religion becomes easier to understand when we see it as part of human evolution. Our species did not evolve to seek truth. We evolved to survive. And in a harsh and unpredictable world, believing in higher powers often gave people comfort and cohesion that improved their odds of survival. Fear of divine punishment reduced theft and murder within tribes. Rituals created strong emotional bonds that kept groups together. Myths offered explanations for natural disasters when science did not exist. But what was once adaptive can become maladaptive. Just as an appendix once served a function but now often causes problems, religion may be a psychological relic, an outdated survival tool that causes more harm than good in a modern world. We don't need myths to explain lightning when we have meteorology. We don't need sacred laws to regulate morality when we have ethics, empathy, and reason. Yet the old structures persist because human psychology is still vulnerable to the same hooks that made religion powerful thousands of years ago. Think about death. No human can face mortality without anxiety. Every religion offers a solution. Some promise heaven, others reincarnation, others union with the divine. In psychological terms, these are defense mechanisms. Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, argued that all of culture, including religion, exists to help humans manage the terror of knowing we will die. Religion simply offers the boldest defense, the claim that death isn't real at all. From a therapeutic perspective, this is denial on a grand scale. Now, denial is not always destructive. In small doses, it can protect us from being overwhelmed. But when denial becomes the foundation of an entire worldview, it blocks growth. Instead of learning to face mortality with courage, people are trained to avoid the thought entirely, to cling to fantasies instead of building resilience. That's why religion may comfort individuals but weaken societies. It replaces mature acceptance with childlike wishful thinking. And wishful thinking doesn't stop at death. It extends into every area of life. People pray for jobs instead of networking. They ask for healing instead of seeking doctors. They beg for signs instead of gathering evidence. The line between faith and magical thinking blurs. In children, magical thinking is normal. It's part of development. In adults, when it dominates decision-making, it looks more like a disorder. Religion, then, can be seen as institutionalized immaturity, a refusal to grow beyond the cognitive habits of childhood. There's also the matter of authority. Most religions demand obedience to sacred texts or leaders. This mirrors authoritarian family dynamics, where one voice must be followed without question. In psychology, such dynamics often breed dependency and learned helplessness. Instead of developing autonomy, believers remain in a posture of submission, waiting for guidance, fearing punishment if they disobey. Once again, the same patterns that would be seen as unhealthy in therapy are praised as devotion in religion, and the consequences go beyond personal psychology. Entire societies can become trapped in arrested development. Progress stalls when divine authority is placed above human inquiry. History shows countless examples: the suppression of science during the Middle Ages, the persecution of dissenters, the resistance to medicine and human rights in the name of Scripture. Religion, in this way, doesn't just mirror illness. It spreads dysfunction through whole civilizations. But here's an important nuance. Religion is not monolithic. It ranges from rigid fundamentalism to loose cultural traditions. Not every believer suffers equally from its distortions. Some people compartmentalize, holding on to faith in rituals while living rationally in daily life. Others immerse fully, letting every aspect of their existence be dictated by doctrine. This spectrum matters, because the more religion dominates, the more it resembles pathology, and the less it dominates, the more it blends into harmless tradition. Still, even mild religion rests on the same foundations of unreason. A gentle superstition may not destroy a life, but it still models irrational thinking. And irrational thinking has a way of spreading. If children are raised to believe in things without evidence, they may carry that habit into other areas, leaving them vulnerable to conspiracy theories, pseudoscience, or manipulation. In this sense, religion may not always cripple, but it does compromise. And there's another dimension: power. Religion is rarely just belief. It is also an institution, and institutions can weaponize belief for control. What looks like personal faith often turns out to be social engineering. Promising eternal reward makes people easier to govern. Threatening eternal punishment makes them easier to exploit. When people see this clearly, the illusion loses its charm. But as long as the illusion remains, the psychological chains remain intact. So is religion a mental illness? Not exactly. It's more accurate to call it a cultural illusion that behaves like one. It hijacks normal psychological processes: agency detection, magical thinking, fear of death, need for belonging, and spins them into systems of belief that resist evidence and cling to authority. It comforts while it harms, heals while it wounds, and unites while it divides. And perhaps the saddest part is that the very qualities religion suppresses, curiosity, autonomy, resilience, are the ones humanity needs most to flourish. Without them, people remain locked in cycles of fear and dependency. With them, people can step beyond the illusions and face reality honestly. Because reality, though it may seem harsh, is also liberating. No eternal surveillance, no cosmic guilt, no imagined punishments, just a universe that is vast, indifferent, and breathtakingly real. Within that reality, meaning is ours to create, not to receive. And when meaning is created consciously, not imposed by authority, it becomes deeper, more authentic, and more human.